Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the MSR Whisper Lite stove that we use. And we're going to be talking about all the different parts of it and what they're called, what they do. The second thing we're going to do is talk about how to put this thing together and use it. And lastly, we'll be talking about what to do when something doesn't work. We're going to talk about some basic fixes. And yeah, let's get started. First, we're going to talk about our pump mechanism, the basic parts of this. Obviously, this shaft here is our pump shaft. And then down here on the bottom, this rubber guy is called our pump cup. And there's a little ring around here. When we take this apart, don't break that. And then basic anatomy of this guy, we've got our valve here. And it's got a handy dandy diagram on there if you forget which way it's supposed to turn when you're trying to turn your stove off. It'll have a reminder on there for you. And then down here, this guy is actually where the air is getting pumped out of our pump into our fuel bottle to pressurize it. That's where the air comes out. This straw that no one seems to know what it's for, that's actually the beginning of our fuel line. And there should be this filter on the end of that, which is helping to remove any sand or dirt or anything in our fuel bottle. You can see the threads on here. There are a couple iterations of this stove that we use. And on the older ones, at the top of these threads, there is a sealing ring that goes around here. And this part, the red part, is plastic. On the new ones, like this one, this is actually rubber. I can bend it right now with my fingers. And so it doesn't have a sealing gasket on the top of those threads because this red guy is made out of rubber. So those are most of our basic parts. Obviously, that's where our fuel line goes. And this is where the bracket for the fuel line attaches to. All right, moving on, let's talk about our burner. First of all, we've got our fuel line, okay, and our attachment to our fuel bottle here, this bracket. In the fuel line, there's this metal cable, which I took one out. Looks like that. It runs the entire length of the fuel line. And that is our fuel line cleaner. We've got our legs, this is the pot stand part of the leg, and then our burner head up here with all these foils packed on top of each other. We've got this long shaft here is called the mixer tube, and if you look through the hole in that, you can see the top of the jet. And then down here, we've got our fuel cup or our primer cup. When you take some of that apart, okay, this is our fuel line taken off of my stove. And that's the jet itself. You can see the very small hole through the top of it. And inside of the jet resides the smallest part of the stove, the shaker needle. Okay. And you probably can't see it, but this has a needle right on the end of it right now, and that needle serves to clean out that hole in the jet as this is sitting in our backpack being jostled around. Great, so now let's talk about the last couple remaining simple parts of our stove kit. We've got our fuel bottle, not a complex thing here, but we do have this child-proof cap on here. We want to make sure that we're not over tightening this, like really cranking down on it because they can get stuck because of that child-proof mechanism. We've got a couple different pieces of foil. This one goes underneath our stove. It's reflecting heat up towards our pot or pan, and it's protecting the ground surface from getting burned. And then lastly, our windshield that goes around everything. It's got a hole cut in it right there for our fuel line to pass through. This can also allow air mixture to get into our burner so it can burn well. Yeah, don't get lazy and just not use it because you've gotten camp late or whatever, because it's making your stove way more efficient. All right, so let's start with the actual fun part of this. So let's assemble this stove and go through how to turn it on. So the first thing we're gonna wanna do is make sure we're on a durable surface, non-flammable durable surface, so not a pile of pine needles, not cryptobiotic soil. And then we're going to attach our pump to our bottle. So take this cap off, make sure it doesn't go in the dirt. Anytime this is off, it goes in here. Now we're gonna take our pump and we're gonna thread this guy to the top of the pump and bend that straw a little bit. And that'll go right into there. And now what we need to do is make sure that we don't cross thread this, the threads on the pump. Snug it up. And you don't have to crank on this, just nice and tight. But now we will be pumping it, and there's no magic number for how much we pump this. It's relative to how much fuel you have in this bottle. A full bottle, we say about 20, 30 times, and then as it gets empty, you're gonna have to pump it more to create enough pressure. So we're gonna go ahead and pump this. When you're pumping your fuel bottle, you wanna make sure you get the entire throw of the pump shaft as you're pushing down on this. If you're doing it halfway, this isn't doing anything. Now we're going to take our burner, and if you look at your fuel line, you've got numbers and letters there on one side of this block. It's only on one part of this block. It's not on any other part. And what we say is those numbers and letters should face the sky when we're attaching our fuel line. So what we'll do, you can see this rotates. This makes it easier for me to attach this. Okay. We're gonna take the end of our fuel line. We're going into that hole. We want our numbers and letters facing towards the sky, like so. Okay. And sometimes it takes a little bit of twisting to get that in there. And now we're gonna take this bracket and we're gonna flip it over the top and latch it on to the back of the pump. So to prime my stove, all I'm gonna do is I'm going to, first of all, make sure that I am safe, that I'm in an active position. Because these stoves can flare up if we let too much fuel out, maybe fuel's leaking, something like that. And we wanna make sure we're in an active position. Even while we're cooking, that we're at least 3 feet away from our stove, and that we're in a position where if the stove were to flare up or my pot of boiling water were to spill, I can get away quickly. So I never want to be sitting cross-legged over my stove or with it between my legs, anything like that. I want to be in a kneeling position, or a similar position, even in your camp chair. You can fall over to the side in your camp chair to fall away from your stove, so that if something were to happen, you can get away from it. Let's go ahead and prime this. The reason why we need to prime a stove, let's talk about some science here. Basically what's happening is we have a liquid gas in here, and if we just turned our stove on right now and we tried to light it up here at the burner, we're just gonna be burning a liquid, and it's gonna be a big tall bonfire flame. So what happens when we prime our stove is we let a little liquid in down here, we light that, and that liquid burning heats up this turn in the fuel line right here. The turn that's going past the burner of the stove. It heats that up and it heats the jet up, okay? And so when that liquid fuel then comes out of our bottle, goes through a hot fuel line and through a hot jet, okay, we're creating a vapor by boiling that liquid. And so when that vapor comes out after our stove is primed, the vapor comes out up here at our burner, and we light that and it burns much hotter and much smaller. That's when we get that nice flame. I'm gonna crack it on. I'm gonna look in the fuel cup and listen. and I'm shutting it off. So we don't need to fill up that primer cup with fuel. We're just getting a little bit in the bottom of it to get it wet. One trick is most people light a lighter with their thumb. Okay, when you're lighting the bottom of a stove or the burner, it's really nice to be able to light it with your finger, with your pointer finger. It's just kind of awkward to try to get your fist down there. So practice that and try lighting a lighter with your pointer finger. So active position, I can get away from this thing right now and have a fire extinguisher. No light. Great, so that is burning right now. It's pretty hard to see on the video. And the flame will get a little brighter. If you're finding that your primer cup is going out really easily, you probably just don't, maybe if it's super windy, you want to put your windscreen around there and maybe let a little bit more fuel in there, but not too much. So now all you have to do is let that burn out. Great, so primer just went out. That means that this stove is hot, okay? And we are ready to light it up at the burner. So again, I'm gonna be in the active position. I'm gonna be ready for this thing to flare up because maybe it didn't get hot enough. Maybe it's kind of in between. It's pretty warm, but not quite hot enough to make that nice clean flame, so you might get a big flame. So I'm gonna be active here, pointer finger light, turn my stove on, and you can hear it coming out, and now we're lit. Okay, this stove is running really well. It's got a really nice blue flame, and it's not sputtering out orange flames. So that's what we want, and now we're ready to get cooking on this thing. So to shut this thing off, all we're gonna do is turn the dial, turn the valve off clockwise. And right before it goes out, we're gonna blow it out. And that's because as it goes out, it might start sputtering an orange flame, and that'll cause carbon buildup, things like that. So it helps keep our stove clean. So that's how to turn this thing on and turn it off. Now, after maybe we just had dinner and we want to make hot drinks, or we want to make water to clean our stuff, our utensils and such, we might have a stove like I mentioned earlier, that's not quite hot enough, but it's still pretty warm because we cooked on it recently. So when you go to light a stove you've recently run, you want to make sure you're really in this active position, well away from your stove, and you're ready for it to flare up and to shut this off. And if you do have that situation with your stove where we call it a tweener, it's in between being hot and cold, you have two options. The first option, which is the best and safest option, is to just let it completely cool off and prime it again and start over. The second option, especially if you didn't know it was a tweener and you lit it anyway and now you got this flame going here. What you can do in that situation is if you got that flame going, just turn your stove off, and there's enough liquid gas on here to continue to burn, and it'll heat this stove back up. And then once that's happened, you can light it again. Let's get into some common problems. Say a student comes, and this happens all the time, a student comes to me and says, Zach, we just can't boil water as fast as any of the other cook groups. Something's wrong with our stove. We don't know what to do. Yeah, the first thing I'm going to check is that there is enough fuel. It's a really common problem, that there's just not enough fuel, and we got to fill that up. The second is is there enough pressure? So have they been pumping this enough times? Especially as these fuel bottles get low, you got to continually pump them as you cook. And you got to pump them a lot more than 20 or 30 times. So Gotta keep pumping. And also a really common fix is that it's just not on high enough. So many people turn their stoves on, and when they light it, they don't want it on all the way. And so in case it flares up. But then when they actually start cooking, they forget that they haven't turned this on all the way. And they're like, man, this stove kind of stinks. Let's make sure it's on all the way. And that could really save you a lot of problems. The next thing I'm going to do is, if it seems like it's clogged up, it's not running strong, this is on all the way, and it's pressurized, but this is still weak. We've got a pressure issue somewhere in there. So that could mean a number of things. It could mean we've got a leak somewhere where I might not actually have pressure, or more commonly, we've got a clog. So let's talk about the clog first. We've got a number of parts that could be clogged, okay? Our fuel line could be clogged, or our jet could be clogged, okay? So the easiest one is a clogged jet. And that's because it's got that awesome shaker needle in it. Okay, so the shaker needle goes up and down through the jet to clear out the carbon that builds up in there. And so the first thing we're gonna do is we're just gonna shake this guy. And you can do this carefully in an active position while it's on to see some results. You need to use a pair of pliers when you're doing that, and be super careful that you're not gonna get hurt by doing that, or somebody else. So I'm gonna shake that shaker needle. Don't hit the stove, don't hit the fuel cup, the primer cup, against a rock or anything, because you might damage your stove. You can hit the legs as you're shaking against a solid surface to try to give it a little more oomph, but don't break your stove while you're doing this. Sometimes it can take a lot of shakes to get that carbon out of there. If that's not working, what we can do is take the jet out. So let's do that. So this process, we're gonna have to take some small parts out of here, and we wanna make sure that we are not gonna lose those or anything. So I like to do this in the backcountry over a frying pan, something like that. Something that'll catch any parts I drop. So the first thing we're gonna do to get to the jet is take the primer cup off. Okay, that just unscrews. This does get really hot when the stove runs, so don't burn yourself if this stove has been recently running. So now we've got the primer cup off, and you can see the bottom of the jet housing there, and the mixer tube is what that's called, this long shaft. So we've exposed that, and now we're going to gently pull the fuel line off, okay? And the fuel line should be going through one of the legs of the stove. So that doesn't just run away from us, it stays there. And now we've got our jet here. Our jet is in the very end of our fuel line, and that's the top of it. So what we can do now is we can unscrew this jet. And this is the part where we want to be really careful, because inside of this jet, and the housing for it, too, we've got this shaker needle, that really, really small part. And so if we drop that, we're kind of out of luck. Your stove will still run, kind of, but it's pretty sputtery. So now we've exposed, we got the top of our jet, we've got this needle exposed, and we're going to take it out of there. Okay, got that. And the thing that might be going on here is you probably can't even see it. But yeah, that tiny little hole, that's actually the where the fuel is getting sprayed out of. And so if that is clogged with carbon, we were trying to just shake this needle up and down in that cup to get it out. But now what we can do is be really careful so we don't bend this needle, this teeny little needle. And we're going to take it and push it through the top of this hole and try to clean out any carbon buildup in there. And the hole is the size of that needle. Okay, so don't think the hole is bigger and try to work stuff out of there because you'll bend your needle. So I give it a couple times. You can also put a little bit of fuel on this to help clean off the carbon. And then after I clean it out a few times, what I'm going to do is the needle goes back into this so that it's going through, it's oriented towards the hole, the jet itself. Okay, so when my stove is back assembled, that needle should be facing up towards that hole so it can clean it. Now all I do is take this and thread it back on to my fuel line. And then take my fuel line and just do the whole process in reverse. Slide this back in there. Put my primer cup back on. Okay. So the next step we can go to is cleaning out this fuel line. So if we're not getting enough pressure out to our stove, there might be a clog in here. And we want to try to remove that. Okay, we're going to take our pliers, needle nose, Leatherman, whatever it is, and grab that and pull it out. Okay, that's what it looks like. And if there was large debris in there, this wire hopefully would carry that debris with it out of the fuel line. But there can be a lot of carbon buildup, especially on the burner side of this line. That's much smaller. So what we can do is just take a clean bandana, any kind of material that you don't mind getting fuel and carbon on, like my fingers, and get some fuel on that and then run that along here. Don't just stick this in your fuel bottle and clean it off, because now we just took the sand or whatever it was, we put it back into our fuel. So use a bandana or something you can get fuel on to clean this off. And then we're just going to reinstall.
Now all we're going to do is we're going to shove that back through here. It's going to get more difficult as you get to the end. You're going to run into a few little snags. You can do it with your fingers most of the way.
And it's going to get a lot harder towards the end. And all I'm going to do is take my pot grips or my Leatherman, anything like that, and I'm going to feed this back in there. And at the end it gets pretty difficult. And it will hang out a little bit, and that is just so that we can grab it with these pliers. So the next part I want to talk about is the pump and the problems here that can manifest in a couple different ways. So let's start with the most common, which is this just being cross-threaded, okay? Not being properly attached to the fuel bottle. You might see a little fuel leaking out around the rim of your fuel bottle or right around this neck on your pump, or there could be a lot. So it can be a dangerous problem because that can ignite, or it can just be inconvenient because you're not getting enough pressure. Your stove isn't running very hot. That's because every time you pump this up to pressure, the pressure just leaks out of the cross thread. So make sure this is screwed onto your pump correctly first, okay? If you're experiencing that same problem, but it is threaded correctly, that might be because this O-ring around the top of this needs to be replaced. Another problem, very common, is that the plunger itself inside of here is getting worn out, or it has debris on it, so it's not creating a nice seal as you push down. You hear that little pop? You don't get that pop if there isn't a good seal around that plunger. So what we're going to do is take this shaft out so that we can get to that plunger and service it. So to get this out, it actually has directions on it. Okay, so it's got numbers and arrows. So the number 1 says bring the pump shaft to this elevation. So that arrow needs to be flush with the top of the pump. Then the number 2 says to rotate it, and the 3 says to pull up. So I'll rotate it here. Okay, it just popped over a little bit. and then I pull up, okay? If you go to rotate it and it won't budge, try moving your plunger up and down just a little bit to see if you can get the channels to line up so that it opens and it rotates just less than a quarter turn even is how far it goes, and then it should pull easily out. These little guys here break easily, and we don't have replacements for those in our little MSR repair kits unless you have an extra pump you brought with you. So don't break that trying to get it out. But now the great thing is that we have our plunger exposed. And if you probably can't see very well, but this plunger does have a lot of buildup on it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just clean that off. Just in my hands, I can get all that junk off there. I'm going to try to get it really nice and clean. And the next thing I'll do after I get it nice and clean is I'll actually just take this plunger and invert it. And I'll just hold it there for a minute, couple minutes while I'm sitting in our cook group. I'll just hold it there to get some life back into it. And then the last thing I'll do is we actually have stove oil in our stove kits. Every MSR stove comes with some stove oil. I'm going to apply this directly to my pump cup, and then I can even apply it down in the hole where my pump cup travels. And then we just do the process in reverse. So I'm going to seal this up. I'm going to take this neck, and you can see there's these cutouts here. I'm going to line those up. Push this back down into my pump, and if you rotate it a little bit, this neck and the shaft, while you're pushing in there, you're going to find where it lines up, and it should just snap down in there. You don't have to turn it back a quarter turn or anything again. It'll snap down in there, and now we've got that nice pop, really good seal, and air is coming out down here where it's supposed to. So we know that's happening now. Cool guys, so that covers it for all the basic fixes for the stove. We covered the fuel pump and the stove itself, cleaning the jet, all that stuff. If you want to learn some more of the advanced fixes, we've created another video that shows you how to take apart almost every other small thing on this stove. So I encourage you to check that out, and we'll have some awesome running stoves.